Wanna know why I like the Xbox controller? Because they made one that matches my hat.
Huh? Oh.
Ahoy there! No one asked for this, but I'm doing it anyway. Controllers are the link between you and the game, and a crappy controller makes you never want to go back to them. Atari Jaguar! So why not talk about a whole lineage of controllers from the console that never finds a foothold in Japan? I'm of course talking about the Xbox. We'll go over how this console's controller went from an absolute joke to one of the best there is, and everything in between. In 2001, Microsoft made their first splash into game consoles with the original Xbox. It was a big, beefy boy that was about as heavy as the team you had to carry on Coagulation or Zanzibar. And with a big, beefy box came a big, beefy controller. Kill it with fire! This, believe it or not, is the original Xbox controller. Some call it the Batarang, others call it Fatty, but almost everyone calls it the Duke. Look at the size of that thing. Seriously, the Duke has to be seen to be believed. It's one of the largest first-party game controllers ever made. This controller, alongside the original Halo, fed into the idea of the stereotypical American, since we like things big and we're suckers for action. The design of the Duke isn't 100% original to Microsoft, though. If you look closely, the Duke borrows heavily from the Sega Dreamcast controller. It's got the analog triggers, the placement of sticks and buttons, and 2 memory card slots at the top. Microsoft had some history with Sega at this point, using Windows CE for Dreamcast, and talking with Sega to make the Xbox backwards compatible with the Dreamcast. That didn't work out, and so Microsoft copied some of the Dreamcast controller's DNA. And then they made it a mutant. The analog sticks don't use the same style, with the convex divot being smaller on the right stick. There are no bumpers that had already been established by Sony with their PlayStation controllers, instead using 2 egg-shaped buttons that are white and black resting above the face buttons, which are also egg-shaped. But the size differential between the shoulder buttons and the face buttons is big enough to where you won't mix up your inputs. Gives the old thumb an extra workout, though. This side of the controller is laid out in an arrangement that could have worked for fighting games, if it weren't for the D-pad. This misshapen blob they called a D-pad is cribbed from Microsoft's Sidewinder PC controllers. But not only is it too vague to work for 2D games, it's too small in comparison to the actual Sidewinder pads. Don't even bother trying to throw quarter circles with this, unless you're a masochist. Did I already mention the sheer girth of the Duke? Seamus Blackley, the father of the Xbox, once joked that you could land a helicopter on this controller. Is the bulk of this controller responsible for its regal nickname? Maybe? Blackley claims the nickname of the Duke came from, pardon me if I butcher your name, Brett Schnepf, whose son's name was Duke.
Hail to the king, baby!
Whatever the case, the Duke was not received well upon the launch of the Xbox. It was just too damn big for its own good. But as the years went by, this controller developed something of a cult following since people warmed up to its size. I don't look at this controller with disgust. I look at it with a big, goofy grin on my face. It's really big, but it's also usable as opposed to certain other controllers. The Duke controller is so bad that it's good. Those weird few that did like this controller were pleased to know that it would be receiving a modern update thanks to Hyperkin and Seamus Blackley. But let's be real, when was I ever going to talk about this controller? This is the Hyperkin Duke. The original version came in a similar off-black color with a tint of green, but they released several versions of this controller with translucent plastic or special commemorative designs. Mine is to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Xbox. The look and feel of the Hyperkin Duke is identical to the original controller, but the materials used leave something to be desired. For a controller that cost about as much as a new first-party controller, the plastics sure don't feel that way. If you were ever considering this controller to be a collector's piece, the shell was already gouged from a mishap inside my desk, and the acrylic display stand it comes with won't come together. I suppose the coolest thing about this controller is the LCD screen on the center that plays the original Xbox startup animation. But this 20th anniversary controller adds a little extra at the end. It's really cool to push, even if the novelty wears out after 10 seconds. This Duke didn't feel as good as I hoped, especially with Forza Horizon 5 on PC. It didn't have the same level of precision as opposed to the latest Xbox controller. Other games might be fine, but racing games and fighting games are a no-go. It feels as hollow as anything Microsoft celebrates. $22 for Combat Evolved Mark V, what were they thinking? People still like the Duke, but not everyone liked its bulk. Plus, shipping this controller in Japan would have buried the console before it could have even established a foothold. The Controller S, codenamed XBONE, still didn't help the console crack a predominantly Sony and Nintendo market, but the more compact design was a welcome change. It actually feels like, you know, a controller. Shipping as the standard controller in Japan and becoming the global standard controller 1 year after launch, the Controller S feels much more natural than the Duke. It's here that we can really start to appreciate the Xbox controller layout. The staggered placement of the thumbsticks feels great with the two sticks now matching. It made fragging dudes on Blood Gulch or Hang 'em High much easier on the hands. The face buttons reverted to a more traditional diamond arrangement, relegating the quote-unquote shoulders to near the grip. Xbox thought ahead and made sure those buttons were recessed into the shell so you didn't hit them accidentally. Same thing for start and select. It retains the analog triggers and memory unit ports, but replaces the Sidewinder D-pad with another disc. This disc behaves more like a proper D-pad with a familiar cross shape embossed. It's still not ideal for fighting games given its central pivot and smooth shape, but it makes 2D games much more playable. Controller S is where the Xbox controller blueprint was established, and it's the ideal way to play games on the original Xbox, unless you still love the Duke. But I feel like, as the years went by, no one really looks back at this controller. Maybe it's because of the legendarily bad status of the Duke, but I think it was overshadowed by its younger brother. In 2005, Microsoft got a head start on the 7th console generation with the launch of the Xbox 360, the first HD game console. Not only did it bring a 54.2% failure rate, a number forever etched into my brain, but it introduced the world to near perfection. This is the Xbox 360 controller. It does so much, so right. The 360 controller took all the best aspects of Controller S and put it into a shell that's pure bliss for the hands. It's smooth, it holds well. The staggered sticks make it a dream for first-person shooters. Gone were the fake shoulder buttons and start buttons being near the grips. In came real shoulder buttons with a nice click to them. Start and select were wisely moved to the center of the controller, surrounding the new Xbox logo button with its LED ring that complemented the power button on the console. Press this and it takes you to the Xbox dashboard for all your associated Xbox Live deeds. It was also, for a long time, the best wireless game controller. Sure, it used AA batteries with a charging pack being optional, but it added the perfect amount of heft to the controller. It's something the wired variant lacks, which makes it feel more like a feather. But whether or not you go tethered or wireless, it still feels good. This controller is almost perfect. Which is where we get to the D-pad. Of all the things that were carried over from Controller S, they just had to use a disc with a D-pad embossed into it. It really hinders usability in 2D games, and makes it more likely that you'll not get the input for calling a Predator missile. When the 360S model came out, Microsoft also released a variant of the 360 controller with a transforming D-pad. It also featured thumbsticks that are more closely resembling those on an Xbox One controller. I don't own one personally, but I have held one of these controllers. It's kind of fun to play with a D-pad, but I can't tell you if it makes much of a difference in 2D games. But I did like how the silver variant felt. It felt almost like it was made out of metal, and the monochrome face buttons and chrome D-pad gave it a more premium feel. It seemed like Xbox could do no wrong. And then 2013 happened and it was f***ing terrifying. We step into uncomfortable territory with the launch of the Xbox One, where Microsoft made sure to shoot themselves in the foot right out of the gate with a VCR that doubled as a game console. At least the controller wasn't too bad. It looks like a toy. The Xbox One controller picks right up from where the 360 left off, and that was for the best. However, I'm not a big fan of the original design for the XBONE controller. The top part of the controller is made of a glossy plastic and is a separate piece. That's one rage quit away from becoming something you need to sweep up. At least the D-pad's an actual D-pad now, but it's still dog shit. Oh, for 4! Does Xbox even know how to make a good D-pad? All the sweet ambiguity of the 360's D-pad is still there, making quarter circles hard. Not impossible, but hard. If people could get used to this controller for Killer Instinct, then it means 2D games fare much better, right? It's still not ideal because of the staggered placement, which means your thumb will brush up against the left analog stick. Thankfully, by the late 2010s, Xbox was getting its shit back together and released an updated version of the XBONE controller. This is much more serviceable. The main shell is now one piece, no plastic bridge in sight. Now I can appreciate this controller much better, if mine weren't in bad shape. Yeah, I don't have the most pristine examples of the second XBONE controller, but let's go over them anyway. The Xbox button is moved up to the top with the start and select buttons. Wait a minute, these are Windows icons! Okay, not exactly, but they definitely ain't start and select, a disturbing trend that continues today. Anyway, the buttons formerly known as start and select are right where they need to be. The thumbsticks carry a similar feel to the transforming D-pad controller, but with a textured rim to tell you to never put your thumbs there. Even though 2 of the thumbstick covers on the left stick aren't there anymore, the concave design of the thumbstick makes playing with a plastic thumbstick much more tolerable. Kudos to the designers at Microsoft for thinking ahead when children break things. If you could break the actual controller. The second XBONE controller is fairly durable. I mean, they survived being misused by kids and my own rage, and they're still going. Now, since I don't own any Xbox past the 360, I used these for PC. This was back when USB Type-B was the thing used for controller connections. Unlike the wireless 360 controllers, the presence of USB meant it was truly plug-and-play. Wireless was still an option, if you wanted to fork over money for AA's and an adapter. Type-B cords were everywhere for a while, even on the original batch of Hyperkin Dukes. But that was soon to change. Finally, we arrive in the latest console generation with the Xbox Series consoles in 2021 and a new Xbox controller called the Xbox controller. Not the Xbox Series controller, just the Xbox controller, aka give me a break, Microsoft. It's almost the exact same controller design as the XBONE, at least in terms of layout. But what did they add to the new controller that makes it different? The D-pad is the most obvious difference, being some weird cratered disc that looks like it was attached to the outgoing controller's D-pad. But this is a good D-pad. Shocking! Microsoft finally did something right and married the disc design to the clicky feel of the XBONE pad. It was something similar to what they did on the Elite controllers, but I don't have any to compare to because of how stupidly expensive they are, and because of that, it's the only time you'll hear me mention the Elite controllers. It's probably the best D-pad Microsoft has ever made, and the best one for 2D games by far. In addition to the objectively better D-pad, there's a share button put smack dab in the middle. That's for sharing things like screenshots and game clips to Xbox Live. Useless to me since I don't own any modern Xbox console, and because it doesn't work with Game Bar in Windows. Whatever, it's not like I share cool clips of crap I do in Halo, but because I don't play Halo on controller on PC.
Double kill. Return to sender.
What I do play with a controller is racing games. The triggers are once again analog, but have a grippy texture as opposed to the smooth, glossy plastic of the XBONE. This is great for keeping my finger from slipping off when I'm going full throttle. The rumble is also worth a mention. It's not like the Nintendo Switch's newfangled HD rumble, but it really helps me in games like Forza with braking. The rumble helps me feel the car braking, plus the different rumble motors help me determine what side of the road I'm drifting off of. I've always been a fan of force feedback in games ever since Star Fox 64, so I have a hard time being objective with this feature. The Xbox controller, this one, interfaces with USB Type-C, which is probably good if I had a better understanding of these things. But Type-C is everywhere now, so it works. What's still not great is the need for AA batteries, even though literally every other first-party controller is rechargeable. Cost-cutting measure? At about $70? I don't think so. And yes, these are the batteries from when I first got this controller. I have no use for them since wireless functionality is still sold separately for PC. But if I ever find myself around an Xbox One, the controller is backwards compatible since share button support was added in an update. But I'll never get an Xbox because I'm a cheapskate who doesn't want to pay for online multiplayer and would rather put that money towards a GPU that could put the Xbox to shame, and do ray tracing better. And because the Series S looks hideous in any color that isn't black. And because the Series S is a horrifying look into our all-digital future. But I'm getting off topic. The Xbox controller, that one, is good. I argue it's better than the 360 controller based on the D-pad alone. But I wouldn't blame you if you're still defending the 360 controller. Now, what's a video about controllers without getting colorful? I've got to talk about how Xbox went crazy with controller colors and special editions, brought to you in part by the fine folks at Console Variations. The Controller S goes first, since the Duke didn't get too fancy. Controller S came in some cool translucent colors, but the coolest one is the Halo Special Edition. Translucent green with the Halo logo replacing the central jewel. The 360 is where they really went overboard with special controllers. Halo 3, ODST, Halo Reach, Halo 4, Gears of War, Kinect Star Wars, along with some cool colors like red, chrome purple, chrome blue, chrome red, camouflage, a yellow controller in a giveaway for the Simpsons movie, and so on. They didn't do many translucent colors outside of the Halo 4 controllers, though. Xbox One had Halo 5, Titanfall, the ones with the chrome D-pads, the Day 1 controllers, camouflage, a lot of the revised XBONE controllers, the Phantom controllers, and the friggin' grease-proof controller. Xbox Series consoles continue the tradition. Forza Horizon 5, Electric Volt, the 20th anniversary translucent controller, camouflage, the Halo Infinite Elite controller, the Canadian Tuxedo controller, and let's not get started with promotional items. There are many more different Xbox controller variations out there, and I'm just scratching the surface. I'd run out of breath if I were to list them all, so I'll leave a link to console variations in the description if you want to gawk at controllers like I did. Microsoft took some bold first steps with their Xbox, but the first controller was seen as a misstep. After shedding a few pounds, the Xbox controllers soon became the new standard for gamepads that progressively got better over time, even if it's not taking as large of a stride as it did back in 2001. Microsoft and Xbox catch a lot of flack these days, but there's no denying they can make one mean controller. But there's only one controller out there that matches my hat.